Hey, everybody, and welcome to our latest interview in our series of foreigners living here in Mexico. Our hope is to let you know that if you are considering moving to Mexico, that there are people just like you from all walks of life who have at one point thought about and then jumped into moving to Mexico. And for everyone else who may live here, whether short term or long term, and just enjoy a good story, we hope that you enjoy these interviews as well. And of course, if you find this valuable, we'd appreciate a like and subscribe. And with that being said, let's jump into our interview.
All right.
You
know there'll be some humor involved.
Oh, yeah.
You good on my height? Your height?
Yeah, I
We're
think
all good?
everything looked good when I was looking there, so that's fine. I think we were even, so that's good.
Sounds good to
All
me.
right, perfect. All right. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to our show. And again, for those who may not know, my name is Roddy, and with my wife Landy and our son Louie, we now call Mexico home, and we travel around and talk about the good and bad of living in Mexico, and we now call Puerto Vallarta home. And today we have a very special guest. I'm very happy that he was able to join us and take time from his schedule. Very nice jacket.
Thank you.
And I'll go ahead and let him introduce himself, and we'll get into it from there.
Awesome. So happy to be here. You caught me just coming out of the studio, and that's where we're sitting right now. But yeah, we were just filming the news. But I'm Brent Lane, and anchor of CPS News and co-anchor of Asphalt Radio. And we're sitting in one of our studios, and really happy to be part of this whole YouTube channel you have. Tell me more.
Well, we appreciate it. Like I said, we do try to go around, talk to people, let them know. Again, when I was talking to Jesse earlier, one of the things I mentioned that we try to do these interviews is because we know people who watch tend to maybe consider, well, whether vacation or living here, right? So it's good to know both sides, good and bad, but also that just about any type of person, because I've dealt with interviews, as people may have watched, from all walks of life, all ages can come to Mexico, right? And so I just want to try to show that, anybody can come here. It's a great place to be, right? And so with that being said, I know you just got out of your recording. We'll probably talk more about that later.
Of course.
But I know you do have a kind of an interesting background when it comes to travel. So one of the first things I do like to ask is, so what kind of motivated you to move abroad? And did you consider any other places before you came to Mexico?
Okay, absolutely. So I've been planning this for a really long time, even longer than I've known my own wife. So I owned a place really early on, like in the late 90s to 2000s. I bought a condo in Roatan, Honduras, and I was going to go move into it. And then I met this girl that became my wife, and she's like, I'm not moving abroad with you, you serial killer weirdo. I don't know who you are. And as a matter of fact, she was 29, didn't even have a passport. So that was kind of funny. I was like, who doesn't have a passport? So I would have been living abroad much sooner, but I just met her. We got to get to know each other a bit, but she always knew the plan that I wanted to live abroad as an expat. And so had that opportunity in 2015 to finally depart the USA. My wife left her great job. I left a great job, but it was perfect timing for us. And so we just wanted to travel the whole world for a full year. And we did. We saw like 28 countries, which honestly is too many for 1 year. That's a lot of countries.
Oh, in 1 year?
Well, yeah, Thank goodness for Europe. They're all kind of compact.
Sure.
But we'd spend a month here, a month there. But really it was a way to identify places in the world that we like to travel, and then places in the world that we'd like to live, which are very different. The places that we like to travel was a pretty big list. The places that we would live was pretty small. But in the end, what we did is we got tired of all that travel, and we ended up staying for 2 years in Hanoi, Vietnam.
Oh, nice.
So we lived in Hanoi, Vietnam. It was super cool, completely opposite culture, a 12-hour time difference, which can be a little difficult, especially with my wife's online work. I was fortunate enough to retire young in 2015, so it was really like trying to figure her part out. So we spent 2 years there, and then we realized we needed to just go explore more of the world. And so then we moved to Cartagena, Colombia.
Oh, nice.
So we lived in Cartagena, Colombia. We were on an episode of House Hunters International, which was pretty cool.
Oh.
So we ended up on TV looking up.
We may have seen you.
Yeah, Cutting Loose in Cartagena.
We've seen plenty of those shows.
You've been like, who's that annoying guy that's so bad on TV? That was me. They made me out to be a complete villain. And shortly after that, we actually left Colombia. The government was kind of giving me a hard time about, getting residency. It was sort of like, bye. And then we moved to Mexico, which funny enough is a place that Laura and I had always talked about never living, because it just felt, it's nothing against Mexico.
Sure.
It just felt a little too close to home, and which is fine. We love our families and all that kind of good stuff. But, going from Hanoi to Mexico was just a big transition and so much closer. But the good news was, the culture is a lot more similar. The food, especially being from Texas, was a lot more similar. So overall, now we've been in Mexico for 6 full years, 2 of which were in the Yucatan and Merida. And the last 4 years have been right here in Puerto Vallarta, which checks all of our boxes. We freaking love it here.
Nice. Now, you mentioned you moved around for travel and for looking for places to stay. What other places kind of came up on your radar as far as possible places to live?
Yeah, that's a good question. So some of the ones we really liked, but were kind of impossible, like Cape Town, South Africa. We spent a month in Cape Town, South
Okay.
Africa. Absolutely loved it. What a beautiful place. But getting residency or any kind of a green card there is almost impossible. Really hard for my wife to get work there. So that wasn't, she even had an interview when we were there, but it just wasn't going to work out. It's too hard to
Okay.
get residency. Next, we really enjoyed Prague. I don't know if I really spent enough time in Prague, but
Okay.
it checked a lot of boxes, very different ones than Cape Town, but it checked a lot of boxes for us, but it just wasn't going to work out either. So I already talked about Cartagena a bit. That definitely wasn't it. But here, right here in Puerto Vallarta, like a lot of those boxes are checked. And it's interesting how these check boxes have evolved the more and more we've traveled. Like, great internet connectivity wasn't the highest on the list. Safety used to
Sure.
be the highest on the list, but safety kind of moved down a little bit because a lot of that was overblown and internet moved up. So, that's a pretty small list. There's a few others in there, but I'd say those are the top ones. We were like, man, we could really live there.
Okay. Well, and I'm glad you brought that up as far as the top ones, because I always kind of like to ask the other end of the spectrum on that. Was there
Mhm.
some places that you maybe considered, and then you're like, yeah, maybe not so much?
Yeah, let me think about that. So, I mean, Europe was great and all that, but it just didn't and Europe's a big place.
Sure.
Obviously, I'm including a lot of Europe, but overall, it just felt too close to home. And
Mm.
for work, when I was in the U.S. for 25 years, I traveled for a living, so I saw a lot of the U.S. and it just kind of felt similar, but more castles. I didn't know how to describe it, but it probably wasn't going to work for me. And I know Prague's inclusive of that, but that probably wasn't going to work. Iceland was beautiful, and I
Sure.
really loved Iceland. I loved all the outdoor, but man, Iceland's really, really small. I don't eat whale, and it's really expensive, so that wasn't going to work out either. Australia, New Zealand, beautiful places, a little
I've
pricey.
heard.
Because again, I retired young. My wife still works, but I retired young, so I have to kind of keep an eye on like what are the expenses where we live, and like I said, Puerto Vallarta is fine. It's not. Now here's one thing we learned. So this is interesting. Places that are traditionally really, really cheap, for example, like places where backpackers go, like Hanoi.
Right.
A lot of people go there to teach English and they're backpackers. It's not a great place to live. I mean, it's hard because you get a subset of people that are Western that they're just kind of a mess. And then everybody gets lumped into that. And it's hard to explain on camera, but like places traditionally that are backpacker havens just weren't for us. So that eliminated a lot of places for us.
Okay. Okay. So now, obviously, you traveled a lot of different places, and you came here to Mexico.
Mhm.
So when you first came here to Mexico, could you describe what your initial experience was when you first got here?
Yeah, so being from Texas, I had traveled to Mexico as a tourist, which obviously, as your viewers know, is very different being a tourist than actually living somewhere and
Yes.
being an expat. So moving to Merida. So Merida is where we moved into the Yucatan. It was all based upon, we had to leave Cartagena. Merida was in a lot of articles in Forbes, a safe, great place to live.
Right.
So we got there and it was beautiful. It was lovely. It was charming, but that was my first impression. A lot of Yucatecan food. I was like, do these people ever eat a vegetable? I mean, that's kind of like I
No.
need a veggie. No, they never do. It's
Yeah.
habanero sauce and meat.
Yeah, I mean, it's a jungle, right? It's rainforest out there.
Right,
So-
right. And the Mayan people were lovely, but overall, Merida did not check boxes for me. It did for
Okay.
my wife. So my first impression of Mexico was it's an interesting cultural place. I love, the sense of family and community here and how welcoming and warm the people are here. Even especially like, for example, with the language, like we lived in Vietnam, we learned
Oh,
as much Vietnamese as we could. It's really, really hard. But if you said one word with the wrong tone, they'd be like, I can't understand you. But
Yeah.
in Mexico, my pronunciation's not the best, my Spanish, but man, people are just warm and they just accept you and they understand what you're saying. So that was my first impression of Mexico. It's warm, it's inviting. I like the food a lot better. And
Oh.
culturally, it's just a lot easier here.
It's funny because you've said two things already that kind of struck a chord with me. One was, why you moved to Hanoi, which is, my story, some people may know is, I went out to China,
Mhm.
and it was for the exact same reasons. I went, I wanted to cut out Central and South America and Mexico. I wanted to cut out, Western Europe because of the familiarity. I wanted to kind of go somewhere way off the
Exactly.
radar. So
Yeah.
that's why I ended up in China,
Okay.
that's where I met Landy. And then you talked about tones,
Yeah.
because, in Mandarin, the tones are
Oh, wow.
very similar, and it's very frustrating. I am not a tonal person. so,
Yeah.
so all those tones got me. And sometimes it seems like the most basic thing. Again, I don't know if it's similar in Vietnam, but I always remember this one story where I was in a little rickshaw and going home late at night, And I was trying to ask how much something is, and the guy looked at me like, "What are you talking about?"
Mm-hmm.
But in my mind, you would think the situation kind of dictates what do you think I'm asking. You just gave me a ride. I just got off.
Right.
Now I'm speaking to you.
Right.
Right now, I'm sure I butchered it. I'm sure I probably said something about some cow somewhere, who knows what.
Right.
But he just looked
Yeah.
like, what do you think I'm asking you? So that tonal thing really struck a chord with me.
No, and I have a lot of stories just like that. I won't bore you with them, but yeah, exactly. Like, understand the context. I'm
Right.
saying like the street has a hole, or like I need to go down that street. I'm not saying the monkey has water.
Right.
And like that totally could almost be the same words,
Yeah.
but it's the context of it, which again, here in Mexico, they're just so much more gracious that you're even trying to speak the language.
Which is true. And I found that very much so. So again, that kind of leads us, speaking of challenges. So what have been some of your biggest challenges faced while living here in Mexico?
Biggest challenges living in Mexico. I mean, so getting established is always hard. Like
Sure.
you arrive, we tend to buy properties pretty fast. We have a good eye for it, which is all fine. But then you've got to begin what I call the blocking and tackling of being an expat. Getting your electric bill or CFE bill set up, not easy. Or getting it changed from somebody else's name.
Nothing is easy.
Getting your internet set up, getting your phone working, getting the SIM card right. Just the basic blocking and tackling of like, how do I get this stuff done? I don't want preferential treatment or anything like that. I don't need to like pay for somebody to like get me at the head of a line to get something done. I really want to figure it out and do it correctly. But some days it's like, I remember this from Hanoi, just some days like my wife would get home and she'd just fall on the ground and be like, okay, Hanoi, today Hanoi wins. And I feel like there were those days in Mexico where like today, Mexico, you win. I ordered my food. It wasn't what I wanted. I tried to get my electric set up. They said I was missing one piece of paper or my signature didn't look exactly like my ID. And that was a problem. And so I'd say that. But overall, the rest, again, I'm comparing it to much more difficult places like you with China. Sure. It's much harder in Asia, and the cultural difference is much greater. So honestly, maybe different than some of the other guests. I just find it a lot easier here overall, but small challenges.
Sure, right. And I think, again, having traveled, I think it does make it a little easier.
Right.
And then, so you just kind of brought up, cultural differences, so how have you handled those cultural differences, or how were you able to adapt to these, cultural differences? Because while similar, it's obviously very different here.
Yeah, no, totally. And I try to assimilate, I run a big Facebook group here. It's called Gen Expats PV. And you remember, a lot of people are members. And what I try to do is make sure that I'm running a group that not only provides entertainment for those that are expats or live here or immigrants or whatever you want to call them, but also find ways to give back to the community. And I think that's been my secret sauce for culturally adapting, is one, accept and adapt the local culture and customs. Don't try to get all the preferential stuff or get around things, do things simply sometimes, but also making sure that when you're doing things as a group that may not be exactly the same as what the culture where you're at, you try to find a way to give back. And I think that really creates a lot more acceptance in the community where, traditionally a group called Gen Expats PV could be frowned upon. There's people that take that expat term and they call it this and they call it that. Yes. And I don't get, maybe it's my Gen X of me, maybe that's the part. I don't get hung up on it because people don't give me a hard time because I always do try to find that philanthropic side of everything we do and just find ways to give back to the community. And maybe that's my secret. That's how I do it.
Right. And so kind of, talking about that Gen Expat and the Facebook group. So I guess I can kind of go into this next question. We can expand on this group and why it was started. But, so how have you managed to build, a social network and make friends in the new country? Because I know when people come here, or travel anywhere, move anywhere, that's one of the biggest things is try not to be isolated, not be alone. How do you get out, make friends? So I think that's important. So, what did you go and do?
Yeah, I provided you a great segue there, unintentionally. So, no, I think it's super important. And going back to our time in Hanoi, we had to live in kind of an expat community because it is so culturally different.
Sure.
And the language is so different and nobody's really speaking a lot of English. So we found a really tight-knit community there. Now, opposite of that was Cartagena. For whatever reason in Cartagena, we could not get a network of friends there. It just wouldn't happen. And it's not because lack of being social or outgoing. I mean, if anything, I'm overly social and outgoing. But we couldn't really click there for some reason. And so we were even going to move to Medellin, a different part of Colombia, and get away from Cartagena before we left. Now, in Mexico, in Merida, we did have a lot of friends and I really loved the people there. But it wasn't like here. So we got here to Puerto Vallarta and we made some initial friends, and they were great. We really enjoyed them, but we really wanted to expand the group and have a lot more friends. And we can't be friends with 3,700 people, which is
Sure.
how many are in Gen X. But people always ask me, why'd you start the group? And I did because literally my wife wanted more friends with common interests as us.
Sure.
So we love scuba diving, paddle boarding, hiking, just a lot of outdoor stuff. And so what the Gen Expat group did was allowed us to really expand our reach and be able to find the people in that group that really mean something to us. So, but at the end of the day, if there's ever a trivia question that says, why did you start the Gen X PAX group? I did it for my wife. And,
Yeah.
but it's been great for me too. We've made so many more friends, and I highly encourage people. Like, people always ask me, like, I'm thinking about living somewhere as an expat. What do I do first? And what I tell them is what you do first is you go find those expat Facebook groups or whatever thing you use, but Facebook's what I use. Find the groups, begin to just monitor first. What are people talking about?
Yeah.
What kind of difficulties are they going through? Are they having government problems? I mean, that even prevented us from moving some places,
Okay.
because there was so much unrest and people are like, don't come here. So when you get in tune with those groups and really begin to monitor them, it helps you understand what it's going to be like when you get there, and then just become an active member. And then when you get there, it just all flows and you'll have some friends.
Right. Oh, wow, which is great. I mean, that brought back memories of, I never thought about it in that perspective, but that's exactly what I did when I first moved abroad, was got on some message boards and stuff and just monitored for a while. I was probably for like a month or two before I knew. And so I think that's really a good piece of advice, is just kind of sit back, see what's happening, again, see what the temperature's like as far as what people are talking about. And then once you're closer or there, jump in.
Yeah.
And I know, you hear sometimes with people, they always talk about, oh, you shouldn't hang out with your same type of people, right?
Yeah.
You shouldn't don't hang out with
yeah.
people from your own country. You're here in a new country, and personally, I think it's people getting on their high horse, like, I can't wait to move to their country. I just want to hang out with all the locals and this and that, which is great. I'm definitely not discouraging it. We have local friends, but again, I think it is important, especially depending on your comfort level, right, to join groups of people who are similar to you to help you assimilate. And then, of course, I think from there you can spread out and start to know the local customs and know the local people. But it's definitely a safe place to land, especially if you don't know the language, if you're brand new to a particular place. So that's all a good point.
No, and it's a perfect segue, is because we're sitting here in one of our studios here at CPS, and because I just got done filming it, but I'm the only non-Mexican person in this building.
Right.
There's no one else here, and I'm one of the only English speakers other than Jesse in this building. So, I love it and I embrace it. I really try to speak the language, and I butcher it a lot, but I really try to speak Spanish to everybody. I'm not one of those guys that yells English at you. We've got a mix of expat friends. We've got a mix of friends who, are local. So we try to keep that mixed, but I'm definitely not a high horse person. It's
Sure.
like, I don't blame anyone from like being in an expat group, or I wouldn't have one
Right.
to start with. But I think it needs to be inclusive, or at least give back, and still, try to learn the language. I'm not fluent in Spanish by any means, but can I sit down in a restaurant? Can I order a meal? And the interesting thing here, as opposed to the Yucatan, is that, man, they really appreciate when you order food or do things in Spanish, because I think they're so used to, because it's so much more Western here than Merida. Like, almost nobody speaks, there's not that much English in Merida. Here, they're just expecting me to speak English at them every time. And then what I do is I order, because of the Spanish I had to learn in Merida, I do it all in Spanish, and the waiters and the staff and the management are just like, they're just so grateful, and they love it. And but then they speak Spanish at me at 100 miles an hour, and I'm like, whoa.
Hey, slow down.
Yeah, despacio, blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
And I think that's good. Talking about learning the language. I know that's always a popular piece of advice, which is actually, again, it's kind of odd how this is happening.
Yeah.
But that was kind of my next question.
I did it again.
Right. So I guess besides learning the language, because I think that's a popular piece of advice,
of course,
are there any other pieces of advice you might offer somebody, again, who's considering moving here?
I would say, try to figure out like what kind of hobbies can you have, where you're moving to. And that's a great way to find community too. Like, for example, my wife and I love to scuba dive. We love to paddleboard and hike, like I mentioned earlier. So, seeking out people with similar interests, whether they're Mexican or from Poland or from here, I think that was really helpful. But yeah, nothing else comes to my mind right now on that one. Yeah.
But I think that's good. I know that's exactly what I've done since I've been here, as far as joining other groups and finding other people. Again, I think it's important to find your interest
Right.
And I think that's what makes Puerto Vallarta so interesting, is that there is so much to do here. I
Right.
know, Landy and I would always joke sometimes when we would watch a lot of other uh, those moving abroad or
Mhm.
buy homes abroad, and people always go to the beach areas. They always kind of talk about the same thing. You could like pick any beach place, and you can surf and snorkel and be like, oh yeah,
Yeah,
you can kind of interchange any beach area almost. But I do think Puerto Vallarta is a little bit more special,
I think so too.
because of what it offers. It offers all the basic things, but
Right.
again, I know it has the mountains and the sea, and it's just so much different.
You nailed it because I mean, look where we live. I mean, so you get a subset of people that talk about Mexico and living in Mexico, specifically in places like here in Monterrey and Cabo. They're always like, it's so expensive, it's so expensive. But I think people are missing the comparables there. So when you look at Puerto Vallarta, we have a beach and this big bay, and we have beautiful mountains. So I can literally look out my windows, I can see a marina, an ocean, mountains, and an ocean.
Right.
Where else can you do that? I mean, you're comparing to like Southern California and La Jolla at that point,
Right.
or somewhere like that. And a comparable to that is it's much more expensive there. So when people, I think, incorrectly say, "Oh, Puerto Vallarta, it's too," it might be expensive, but you get what you pay for here.
Sure.
And that's the way I've always viewed Puerto Vallarta. It might be too expensive for some people. Others are perfectly fine, but you've got to compare it correctly to like the comparable place, which to me is like Southern California, and
Right,
I'd much rather live here.
right, apples to apples, right? You can't do the apples to oranges. I think that's
Absolutely.
a perfect example there. So that's good. Now, you know, we've talked a little bit about professional and personal, what you do here, but
Mhm.
how has living here, how has that affected the growth, personally and professionally? Yeah, well, as far as
No,
growing.
no, it's super interesting. So, like I mentioned, I was fortunate enough to retire at 45 years old. Some good moves in the U.S., but I was in a very, very high pressure job, probably 95% travel.
Mm,
But the interesting thing is that my college, my university degree was in radio, television, and film. I
okay.
was doing movies and TV, and I was acting, and I was doing news already, but that was all through college. So now I went on a 25-year break from that and had a career and another few years after that. And I come to Mexico. And of course, I envisioned I'd be on a Mexican TV show. I mean, who would have guessed that? It just blows my mind daily that my good friend and co-anchor, Jesse Ruiz, you know, spotted me and invited me to come do a segment on her radio
Sure.
show, Asphalt Radio, which in reality, she said, okay, I'm lying to you. I really would like you to have a segment consistently on the show. And that actually turned into co-hosting the radio show. And then
Okay.
one day we were like, gosh, you know what Puerto Vallarta needs? It needs news in English so people know like what's going on. And the Spanish news is hard to follow, and the stories are a bit inflammatory sometimes. So we wanted to bring real news, but what it helped me do is like when you retire, maybe just as like my wife likes to say sometimes this is something, it's a male thing. Like you retire young, you don't find all those hobbies you thought you were going to find. You're not doing as much. You might get a little grumpy. You just need, I think it's purpose.
Yeah.
Think about it. It might be some of the reason why you're doing what you're doing right now. I mean, you're looking for a purpose. You're looking for something to really keep you engaged in doing something. And without the job I had, I lost a little bit of purpose. I mean, I'm getting a little bit deep here,
Sure.
but Jesse and this opportunity with her brought me that sense of purpose again, because it's not just sitting down at a table and reading the news for everybody. I mean, there's
Right.
a script that has to get written. There's finding the right stories. There's, just really getting involved with the community because it brings a lot of that as well. So that really helped. I forgot your question, but hopefully I answered it somewhere in there.
But whether you did or not, I mean,
Yeah.
it brought up good points, and
Thanks.
again, a lot of what you say, does strike a chord with me, because exactly what you just mentioned, and I think it does affect men more than women, right? As
Yes.
far as having that purpose. We've been gone 3 years, and when you first get here, the first year, oh, it's all cool, it's great, but as the kind of the grind goes on, and
Right.
the weeks turn into months and years, and it's like, okay, I need something to do.
Well, and you don't do your hobbies as much as you think you will, because then you start saying, okay, so I'm not working, but I'm going to go scuba diving every
Right.
day, for example. I mean, that can get a little pricey over time,
Sure.
and then I feel bad because my wife does still work online. She's got a great job. Like, hi, bye, honey, I'm
See you
going to go
later.
hiking, paddleboarding, I'm going to hang out and drink. It just doesn't work. So having something to keep you grounded and keep you engaged in the community, and how fortunate it is that I get to do something I have so much passion about that was never my job. Like being
Right.
a TV anchor and a radio host is just so fulfilling for me, and it's not a job when it fulfills you that much. It's actually just, I mean, it gives me the purpose, but it really gives me that opportunity to touch the community like there's no way, I would have ever been able to do that.
Right. And I think that's important for because a lot of people who do come here, are retirees.
Mhm.
For the most part, tend to be older, but you do have the younger people who come here and who are fortunate enough, like we were to retire young. So again, you have to find something to keep you busy, occupied. Like I said, for myself, I've talked to my wife about this. It's like gym, fishing, spearfishing, Muay Thai. And now starting to work on my interviews. I have to have something to kind of give yourself
Absolutely.
purpose, keep yourself busy, because it's not all sunshine and rainbows being sitting in paradise every day.
No, it's real life, and
Yeah.
that's the thing. It's like I said it earlier, but like being a tourist versus being an expat or immigrant, or whatever you want to call it, is so much more different. It's
Right.
real life. You're not just out there touring around Centro every day in the and hanging out and up in the mountain. You just can't live your life
No.
sustainably like that every single day of the week. I mean, maybe some people can, and good for them. But I
Yeah.
just needed a little more. I just need a little bit more grounded purpose in my life, and that's what that brought me. So again, I have eternal thanks to Jesse and eternal thanks to my own wife for putting up with me for a few years when I didn't have all that purpose. Especially like in Merida and some of those other places. But once I found that purpose, man, being an expat became so much easier. So maybe that's a theme there. It's like find your purpose when you get there. Maybe you can find it through your Facebook groups or whatever, but just don't get somewhere and don't look for purpose, because without it, you're gonna kind of flail and be a little lost, I think, if you're not working.
Right. Yeah. Look, all good points. So let's kind of moving forward, and obviously we've already talked about a lot of, memories you've had here in other places. What could you maybe, I would hate to say the most memorable, because it's hard to come up with an idea like that. Maybe you have one, but what have been maybe the most, memorable things living here in Mexico, or any like anecdote you like to share to kind of give people an idea of, a little bit about you and what they could expect.
Okay. Well, so one of them's going to go back to the Yucatan. I mean, I
Mm.
think one of the first, so this will be an excursion. So one of the first excursions we did was going and seeing the beautiful cenotes. Like I had
Right.
never been in a cenote before. So a friend that we met there, she is still one of our good friends. She's like, let's go on a cenote tour. I'm going to take you out, and you arrive there and you get on this cart that's on a train track behind a horse, and they take you from cenote to cenote, and you're climbing down in these caves and diving down in this crystal blue water. I mean, that was just mind opening and amazing. And you can see and then the Mayan ruins were amazing.
Right.
So a lot of that was on that side of the world. Over here, I would say, just the opportunity to so being a professional scuba diver, I've been a diver
Oh,
since
sure.
like the early 90s. So I'm a dive master. And so I've been diving my whole life, but I've never lived somewhere when I can actually just jump in and dive. And I'm not saying the diving here is like world class.
Right.
It's okay. But the greatest thing is I can get up and say, "Oh, it's Tuesday. I'm going to go scuba diving," and that to me is just mind blowing that I can finally live a life like that and live like that. I would also say like some of the satisfaction when I can finally like order a full meal and all the way from ordering to the check to the food, and I could do all that in Spanish, and that was
Yeah.
so cool. And it just kind of just made me feel like, okay, I feel like I'm going in the right direction, and maybe that's just a weird one, going from mind-blowing godly cenotes all the way down to I ordered and I asked for the check.
Sure.
But I mean, those were just things that I was kind of like, that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah. Right. For everyone, their own little goals are going to be individual, so that's great.
Yeah.
So now, I guess again, it's kind of in that same vein. What have been some of the most rewarding aspects of living, here in Mexico? And I think there's a few other things I can expand on here, but just
Sure.
in general, what have been some, again, the most rewarding aspects of living here?
I mean, I don't want to go into it more, but obviously being involved with the CPS news and the radio has been huge for me, because that's something I really needed in my life, and I kind of like the attention a little bit, buddy. I kind of enjoy it,
Sure.
but I think for me, like one of the most rewarding things was like I remember when we threw the first big Gen Expats event, and I decided I met Francie Wynn, who's a very philanthropic person here, and she was running the Vallarta School for Girls as well as the food bank. And I said, I want to have this big event. I think there's going to be 50, 60, 70 people. I think it was closer to 70 something people. And I want to throw it and have all proceeds. I don't want to make a dime. I never do. I want to have all proceeds go to charity. And so this is actually going to lead to it. So we ended up raising a bunch of money. And with that, that would have been the end of the story and great. But the better part was a few months after we did that, Francie came to me and said, hey, a lot of our students from the Vallarta Girls School are so interested in what you and Jesse do on air. And they've seen the news program, and they really respect, seeing her up there anchoring the news and this guy. So they're like, they would love to come and do like a tour of the studios. So we brought like 22 girls in 2 different groups to these studios. They sat right here where we're sitting. They watched us on the radio. They came over and watched the live newscast that we filmed. And So this is the best part. The best part is the next week somebody sent me a recording. So the girls watched that whole process.
Ah,
They went back to their girls' school of Vallarta, and it's for girls that are, they don't have, they're de-home. They don't have
sure.
parents. That, they're orphans essentially. They went back and decided we want to put together a day where we're going to do a radio program.
Nice.
So they worked with one of the radio stations here. They got themselves airwaves for the day, and they did an entire like half day or whatever of a radio program. They
Oh,
had segments and they interviewed people. So
and,
all
and it
that
was broadcast.
yes,
Oh,
they
wow.
broadcasted on the radio. How cool is that?
Yeah.
So these girls came in, they were super thankful. They saw it all happen, and then we affected their lives in a way that they actually went back, told their teachers we want to do a radio program, and they did it. And
Yeah,
it was
that's cool.
amazing. I mean, it was all in Spanish. My Spanish isn't
Sure.
that good, but it was just so cool that they did that, and to feel like, Jessica had a tiny little piece of that, and Francie,
Oh,
that was
absolutely.
pretty cool.
Yeah, and that's kind of, I had these questions kind of in mind because I figured this would be a perfect place for that. You just mentioned that you had a expat meeting where the proceeds went to charities,
Mhm.
and in this one in particular, I would kind of put you up there with a community leader as far as at least with expats. And I know you're getting more involved with the local things as you've told me.
Sure.
But what other charities have you what charities do you don't excuse me what charities do you donate to, and
Sure.
why did you choose those charities?
Okay. Well, the two I mentioned, we generally do a charitable contribution as well. So sometimes we'll match the donations that was made. So that specific event I was just talking about for the girls' school and the food bank, we ended up matching. My wife and I personally matched the donation that came in, so we ended up doubling it. I think we raised like 10,000 or 15,000 pesos for the charity at that time. So kind of the funny thing is, I'm kind of finding I'm interchanging year by year between humans and animals. So like that year it was the Vallarta Food Bank and the girls' school, and then the following year we did a bunch for the different pet ones. And as a matter of fact, we just did a big event. So I do an event every year. You were there.
I was there.
Brent's Birthday Bash. B3 we do every year. It's always for charity, and we interchange those charities each year. Well, this year we did it for Sula Society, which is spay and neutering and taking care of dogs. They deal with dogs, and so they send them back to the U.S. and rehome them. So we raised, I think, 17,500 pesos
Oh, wow.
for the dogs. And Sula was so happy about it. They've actually told me like, "Oh, we want you to come and MC and run our Sula Gala, which is in March, and it's a big." Kind of a pricey ticket, but it's a very nice. It's got it's for charity. I mean, your money goes to charity. Yeah, thank you, exactly. And so I have got to run my very first auction. We're having an auction at that, and so that's kind of cool because now not only did I donate to it, but also got to be at the front of an event that's going to gain a lot more money for them. But I'm always looking for that next charity now. So, like I said, I always work with Francie and some of these people that really give back. Like I never say that I'm one of the people that gives the most to the community. I think that's
Sure.
reserved for Francie and some of these other people. I go for more of a two-pronged approach. I try to bring entertainment, especially to our Gen X group, but with a philanthropic piece. So I try to do that. So to answer your question in a very long-winded way, those two charities plus Sula, plus we're always looking for that next one because I'm always looking for another charity. And so if one of your viewers has an amazing charity here, I'd love to hear about it.
Sure.
And maybe that could be the charity for one of our upcoming events.
And that's great, because so my next question was kind of leading into that is, a lot of people have birthdays, a lot of people have events, a lot of times for personal gain, so why do you feel the need, which is great, to give to charities? Where does that come from?
So when I first started the Gen Expats group, we had a lot of events, but people began to wonder, like, why are you doing this? I think people automatically think there's something deceitful going on with people. I mean,
true. No, I
they don't know
understand that,
me.
right?
Yeah, I mean, what are you up to? It's one of those like, what are you up to moments. And so there was a period of time when I first started Gen Expats, and people didn't really know us that well, and we had a big movie event that brought in a lot of money that went to charity. And a few people were like asking questions about where did that money really go? Where did this really go? And so at that time, I decided, like, I had two directions I could go in at that time. I can make Gen Expat something that is purely gives back and doesn't make any money, or I could take a different route and say, okay, well, I'm going to try to monetize this and make money on it. And some people thought I had already monetized it. And actually, it wasn't true at all. We corrected that pretty fast. So I feel being very forthright and very upfront about all proceeds go to this charity. We're going to match it. Just kind of gets rid of any of the confusion with that. And it just makes you feel good. It's like, luckily, we're at a point where my wife does have a good job. I had a good retirement, and we can afford to go out and have great events and not monetize for them and spend a little bit of our own money. So that's huge for us.
Ah, nice, perfect. So having lived here, in Mexico for a while, a lot of times people, I think, before they move to their country, they have their concerns about living, any other country in Mexico, and of course, what they're leaving behind. We're from Texas, from America, so what impact has living abroad had on your perspective of back home?
Yeah. The world's been an interesting place since 2015.
Sure.
So you got to remember, we left in 2015. The U.S. The whole world was a kinder, more gentle place, it
I don't know, it
seemed.
doesn't even seem that long ago.
Yeah, so 2015, the U.S. was easy. I
Yeah,
mean, it wasn't all this fighting and all this Civil War feel. And so we really felt it like when we went to Hanoi, like everybody was so accepting. The president at the time, which was Obama, came and visited. We saw his motorcade go right by. Everybody was cheering. Everybody was happy. And, politics aside, the world's just changed a lot. And it just feels like, I feel like a lot of the people I know back in the US are kind of like, man, I envy you. I wish we could go live somewhere else and abroad for a while and just kind of get away from the craziness of social media and what's happened in the USA. But at the same time, those same outlets and those same media outlets also make them fearful of living in a place like Mexico
sure.
or abroad. And sometimes those fears are warranted, but most of the time they're really not. I
Yeah,
mean, I feel safer here, and my wife feels safer walking at night than like she went on a business trip recently to I won't even say the name of the city, and she didn't feel so as safe,
sure.
and so there's some misconceptions about that. But I think what it's done for us is it's like I'm thankful we left the U.S. when we did because I'm still very fond of the USA. I didn't
Sure.
have to see and have all this division in my life, and whatever. It's easier from abroad, but it's also opened my mind that the world is a super safe place. I mean, I've traveled 50, 60 countries now. And honestly, knock on this desk, I mean, nothing really bad has happened to us.
Right.
None of these fear stories have happened. So, what I would say to your audience is that, just experience it for yourself. Be safe, be mindful of your environment, but, just go out there, experience the world. And I think the world might surprise you a little bit.
Oh, yeah, definitely agree. I think, they do try to put a lot of fear out there, but again, the way media and news is set up, especially
Yeah.
back home, again, that's how they keep people interested, right? By trying to sell the fear,
Yeah.
right? Whether it's at home or abroad. And again, bad things happen out there, 100%, right? But I think again, as long as you keep a level head, know your environment, all those kind of things that people talk about in forums and everything,
Mhm.
I think most people will be okay.
Yeah.
99% of the time, I think people are all right, and it's great to go out and travel and experience, everything the world has to give you,
Yeah. I
right?
mean, bad things happen when it's 4 a.m. and you're drunk wandering around a city.
Anywhere,
Anywhere in the world.
anywhere.
Anywhere in the world. Yeah, so that's just part of life.
Right. And so, having traveled so much and been gone, so much from home,
Mhm.
have you, well, I guess it's kind of a two-part question because there may not be a follow-up, but, how were you able to kind of handle maybe, homesickness or maybe feelings of isolation, and maybe a little different because, you were with your wife as you started traveling.
Yeah.
But, did you have those types of feelings? And if you did, how did you handle those?
That's a great question. So I did have my wife, and I appreciate those people that like they travel abroad by themselves
Yeah.
and they get homesick, and it's really tough, and it's hard tackling things as a single person individually and not having that partner beside you to help you get through. Like sometimes I don't want to go deal with the electric company today. You take this one, or I'll take this one, or I don't want to deal with this. I mean, it's just easier with two people. Her Spanish is a little bit better than mine. Mine's not terrible, so between two of us, we can usually understand things. So it is easier having a partner. So that part's been fine. Homesickness, not really. No offense to our family or
Sure.
anything, but I traveled the US for work. Like I said, like 95% of the time, I don't miss a whole lot about the USA. I mean, yes, I am going, like when we do this interview, I am leaving for Vegas tomorrow, but Vegas, it's just an easy vacation for us because we've been
Sure.
so many times. Just sometimes you just want to say, I just want to go. Let's go to Vegas. We haven't been there in a while. Enjoy it. But honestly, it might be years before I go to the US after that. I just don't go back that often. And when you live in a place that's sort of paradise and a vacation place, it's amazing how many people come see us.
Right.
Yeah, and don't stay with us,
Yeah.
not everybody, but some people, they'll just come down here, they'll vacation. So we get to see that. My dad loves to come down here.
Nice.
My wife's parents are, her dad's a professional fisherman. He loves to
Mm.
come down here. So yeah, so I mean, I think she does more than I do, but
Sure.
since this is about me and not her, I do not get that home. I don't get that homesick.
Okay. And so I know you kind of mentioned that you don't miss much, but is there anything that you do miss from back home?
Every now and then a good burger. You know, you know what else I do miss? And you'll appreciate this one. Texas barbecue. Now
Oh yeah,
we
yeah.
do have one good place. I'll have to show it to you sometime. There
Okay.
is one. I can't pronounce it correctly, but they're really good and pretty close to legit barbecue. But you know, what else do I mean, just sometimes the ease of it. I mean,
Mm,
but it's kind of weird. So this is the interesting thing, Rod, is that I go back and sometimes I'm like, man, it's so much easier because I'm communicating in English. Things are a little bit easier. I'm not having to go through. But you know, every time I go back, I find it overwhelming. It's too much English around me. I understand. I feel like because my Spanish is only average, I can tune out the world a lot. So I can be in a huge crowd of people and everybody's speaking mostly a different language and I can just kind of live in my own little bubble. But then when I'm in the US, I'm hearing everybody's conversation. It's almost like
mm.
that superhero with the amazing hearing.
Right,
It's like too much. And that's how I feel sometimes, especially in the airports in the US. Like
right.
sometimes it's just, man, it's just too much. I hear somebody over here yelling about their order. Another person just dropped something. Another person's yelling because they didn't get
That's true.
addressed by this. And it's like, oh my gosh, it's just too much. And I really felt that last time I was back for Thanksgiving. It's just like y'all are just. I need to go into bubble. So you know what you do? You put in your noise canceling earphones and you get back to Mexico.
Yeah, that's true. I never, again, that's another perspective I never thought about. And
Hmm.
but it's very true. When you go home and you can understand every single thing that's going on,
I don't know if I want to.
yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes it's not worth it, right?
No. No.
Oh well, that's great. I appreciate that. I appreciate the time you've given us today. And I know you've given some great advice. But again, I always like to ask any parting words, of wisdom or advice. Last advice you'd like to give to anybody out there who may be considering coming to live, whether in Puerto Vallarta or Mexico in general.
Yeah. I think the main thing I would say is like, if you want to be an expat or if you're afraid to be an expat or whatever it may be, one, do your research, prepare. I mean, it was at least a year, it was years before we departed the US with a lot of preparation beforehand, selling everything. So there's a lot of steps, but don't have to go it alone. There's a lot of resources out there. You can ask people like us, or you can look online and really understand, how do I launch into that life? But then two is like, don't be afraid. Like just gut it out and feel it and just get out there and do it. And I guarantee where you get to where you're going, whether it be Mexico or Vietnam or Australia, you're gonna get there. It's gonna seem big and overwhelming, but then there's gonna be that moment somewhere down the road where you're gonna go, man, why was I so worried about that? And better yet, this is what a lot of expats say, why didn't I do that sooner?
Yeah.
Most people say, why didn't I sell my stuff sooner? Why didn't I leave sooner? And a lot of that stuff that I experienced. And so those are the things I would say are really important is be prepared, don't be scared to go. And trust me, it's going to be better when you get there. And even if it's hard or difficult, just chalk that up. And then that way, something about yourself in that place and you can look for the next one.
Yeah, true. Well, again, all great pieces of advice. And again, thank you so much for joining me. I know you answered a lot of questions, and hopefully this could be helpful to people out there that are watching. And thank you. And thank you all for joining us. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. We'll get back to you. If you would like to reach out to Brent, I'm sure we can set up some kind of contact. And so thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you next time. See ya.